Island on a very normal Monday evening. For all of you people with your blue hair and your pronouns, welcome to the show. I'm Cog, and I will be your host for this evening. Tonight, we'll be looking at Ukraine's new weapon systems in the wake of the US elections, the farmers' protest in London that's supposed to be going on tomorrow, Adrian Ramsey's critiques of Labour's farmland inheritance tax, and Rachel Reeves misleading people with her employment history. I'll be joined throughout the night by Curtis Daly. How are you doing tonight? It's gotten really cold suddenly. I am freezing.
It is really, really cold, actually. I tried to put my heater on like really far into the year, and I've just turned it on this week. Probably haven't for about an hour a day to save money. I also love how you've introduced the showers with your dyed colour hair and your pronouns, and
Yeah.
it's me with my dyed blonde hair.
Oh yeah, dyed hair and pronouns.
Right
Yeah,
into that stereotype. So
yeah, straight into the
we're going to
stereotype.
be screaming and crying about all things that we disagree with because we're annoying lefties, aren't we?
Woke lefties. Well, that was why I included a bit about being like it being cold. It was just something that was bothering me, so I'm going to cancel the Met Office. I don't know what I'm saying now. Okay, cool. Let's get on with the show. Don't forget to like and share the live. It helps us out massively and allows us to keep the show going. Curtis and I will be reading through your comments after the third story, so do keep commenting your thoughts as we go through the stories. All right, on to our first story of the night. This is probably going to make a lot of farmland owners unhappy, but their protests about inheritance tax really scream special pleading to me. Protesters are planning to gather in London tomorrow against Labour's inheritance tax being applied to farmers with farmland assets over £1 million. Regarding the tax, The Guardian wrote in early November that Rachel Reeves stirred up anger when she made a surprise announcement at the budget that farmland worth more than £1 million would be subject to inheritance tax. Since 1992, Agricultural Property Relief, APR, has meant family farms have been passed down tax-free in a policy intended to bolster food security and keep people on the family land. The tax they pay will be about half the usual rate of inheritance tax and will stand at about 20%. But it gets even better. According to BBC Verify, under the new tax rules, those 462 farms would be affected by the 20% inheritance tax on any value above £1 million, not the whole value, first of all. However, as their independent tax expert points out, like for the rest of the population, there is no inheritance tax to be paid on the value of property up to £325,000. So that's added on, bringing the untaxed total to 1.325 million, I should say. If a farmer is married, his or her spouse will be able to pass on another £1.325 million tax-free, taking the total untaxed amount to £2.65 million. When searching for the numbers affected, BBC Verify included this very interesting line. An alternative way to look at it An alternative way is to look at the number of farms that are bigger than about 200 acres, 81 hectares, because at average land prices, that would be enough to mean inheritance tax was due. Just to give you an idea of what 200 acres is, a football pitch is just under 2 acres. So this tax would only apply to people who owned 100 football pitches worth of farmland or thereabouts, subsidised for them and their spouse, paid at half the normal rate of inheritance tax and only on assets over £1 million for anyone. In other words, the 100 football pitches wouldn't be taxed at 20%, but anything more would. Speaking to the BBC about this policy, Keir Starmer also said that we've put £5 billion in the budget for the next 2 years into farming. That is not to be overlooked. That is the single biggest sum of money in a budget over a 2-year period that has ever been put down in relation to farming. But of course, this kind of misunderstands the point. Most family farms don't own 100 football pitches of land, and a large amount of farmland is leased. In other words, the people who own the land call themselves farmers, but other people do the actual farming and rent the land from them. You can put £5 billion into farming and these people won't care because it doesn't actually affect them. They don't do any farming. They're not concerned about the farming. They're concerned about the profits and the money that they could make from this land. ITV spoke to a farmland owner who gave his reasons for protesting in London tomorrow.
Can't carry on farming anymore. It's also demoralising. You don't farm for the profits, you farm for your kids. No one owns a farm, you look after it to the next generation. When you're going to lose 20% of all you've ever worked for, your ancestors have worked for, people are very angry. So it means that a farm every 20, 35 years or whatever, when generations change and it gets a new manager or a new person in charge, it's just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. 2 or 3 generations, it's gone. And the line that's came out of the government is it's only going to affect 565 farmers a year. We can't afford to lose 5 farms a year. We are a nation that's growing. There's nearly 70 million in the UK. We need to feed people, and it's farmers that produce that food.
Do you feel like Labour understands farmers?
I don't think any government recently has understood them, but this one particularly, I think they've rushed the budget. They've not looked at the figures. I think we're the fall guys. If it's a strike that's needed, if we're not listened to on the 19th, I can see that happening, but it won't just be farmers striking, it'll be everyone around us.
Tell us a bit about the protest that you've organised for Tuesday.
I don't want to let the numbers out the bag yet, but put it this way, you won't want to buy around. We're going to have a procession down Whitehall, round Parliament Square, led by children on pedal tractors. We've also got a big food bank collection as well happening here. Being farmers, we're kind of used to giving food away below the cost of production, but we want to remind the government that we produce food. We aren't rich landowners. We just look after that landscape and we grow the food for the nation.
By the way, the numbers are about like 10,000 to 30,000, maybe 40,000 that I've seen at maximum protesting in the capital. Would be the that was the BBC's guess at the numbers that we're talking about, because he seemed kind of hesitant to say, talking maybe about 40,000 tops. Now, props to them for the food bank idea. I think that's actually a really good thing. Like, credit where it's due. That's a really nice idea. I love the idea of them like protesting by giving away food to food banks. 100% for that. But the idea that farmland owners with 100 football pitches worth of farmland aren't wealthy and don't deserve to be taxed according to that wealth, it's not even taxing that wealth in total. It's taxing the wealth exceeding that amount, which again he didn't seem to understand in his reflection. He was like, "Oh no, it'll take away, and it'll mean that each generation gets smaller and smaller and smaller." But like that's capped. That's capped at quite a high amount. What do you think about all this, Curtis? Because I'm struggling to have sympathy for these people.
Yeah. I first want to echo your sentiment that what the chap said in the video. Love the idea of food banks, not the idea of food banks, but giving food away to food banks. That's a really nice gesture, and it obviously helps. That aside, it seems like he doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to tax. So as you just relayed, the pie doesn't get smaller and smaller and smaller until it disappears. Taxation is based on how much you earn, and this is obviously, if we talk about income or wealth, over a certain amount, and that's the taxable income. You still have that money under the taxable income or wealth that's not taxed on it. So it's weird that he said that. He clearly doesn't understand. I don't feel sorry for them. I'm sorry, but these are rich people. Now, you'll notice on right-wing channels, on GB News, oh, the poor farmers, they're being taxed. Well, first of all, it's just levelling out the taxation system. Inheritance tax is a tax break for the very wealthiest. Now, 4% of people in the UK pay inheritance tax. So the idea that this guy was saying, everyone's going to be against this. Well, it only hits 4% of people. It's a tax loophole that rich people use to exploit. Most notably, Jeremy Clarkson. He bought a farm just so he could get away with not paying inheritance tax. I want to say, for all my criticisms of Labour and Rachel Reeves, this is a very good policy. And it is just a handful of people, I have to stress, it is a handful of people who are moaning on the airways, who clearly have a loud voice, exclaiming this is such an unfair policy. It really isn't. It's just levelling out the taxation system. Now, in the budget, it does say, Keir Starmer said that they are going to give £5 billion worth of subsidies. So it's not like they're not getting anything. I mean, at the end of the day, farmers get government subsidies. They've had it for years. So essentially, asking to pay not even the full amount, which is 40% on inheritance tax, but 20% with so many different caveats, isn't really unfair. Also, the problem in that £5 billion is, it doesn't necessarily go to the actual farmers or the land. It goes to those that own the farms and rent it out. This is the people we need to be talking about. And you're absolutely right. Again, most of these big farmers who are going to be affected, which is a taxation of £1 million, or some cases could be up to £3 million. It's not poor farmers who are struggling to make ends meet. It's very, very wealthy farmers. Now, some people might say, or some people have said, well, we are asset rich but cash poor. Right, okay, I would understand that if it was income taxes going up, right? But it's taxes on assets, taxes on wealth. So if you're asset rich and you have low cash liquidity, then in terms of your material conditions, it's not going to be that much of a difference to you. You're not going to be destitute after this end to a tax break because you've admitted yourself you have a lot of money in these assets. And it's often from work that you haven't done. I mean, again, the guy in the video said, our ancestors did this. So your ancestors did the work and you're getting something for free. Now, I'm not angry at that. I mean, it's, you know, good for you that your family works for this and you get to reap the rewards of your family. But I don't see anything wrong with paying a little bit of taxes on something that you didn't earn, because that's a huge issue in our country when it comes to taxation. I don't really have too much of a problem with income taxes. Maybe we could raise income taxes just a little bit. But the problem is unearned income. I really also liked in the budget that they're going to increase capital gains tax, for example. So these are the people we need to hit. But of course, the right-wing media, people like Nigel Farage, who's drumming this up in Reform, these are a bunch of rich guys all coming together and complaining that they've got to pay their fair share. Boo-hoo, I say, boo-hoo.
Yeah, it's that I want to emphasize again the distinction, because I feel like we're gaslighting people a little bit. Maybe not gaslighting, lying to people. People misuse the term gaslighting as well, but people are misusing the term farmer here, right? A lot of these people aren't the people doing the work. I feel like the term farmer should apply to those who are like in the field actually doing the digging up the soil. A lot of these people aren't farmers. A lot of these people lease out farmland to people who actually do the work.
Well, it's actually probably we probably shouldn't be saying farmers, but they're framing that on purpose, by the way. They're saying you're taxing those that are providing you food. You're absolutely right, Cog. It's the workers who are doing that, and often they're not the ones who own the farm. Obviously, they're not the ones that reap the rewards. We can talk about funneling our public subsidies in a much more targeted area where it goes to those workers precisely. But more often than not, it is just kind of a landlord subsidy. That's how a lot of government subsidies work. And I'm not against government subsidies, but we can clearly understand that when it goes to universal credit and benefits, often that goes to landlords, right? This is kind of the same thing. So we have to deconstruct the narrative that has been spelled out here, that it's not poor farmers who are struggling and Labour are just so horrible. I mean, they're horrible in many other ways, by the way, which the right-wing media won't talk about. But they're going after landowners who have already got loads of wealth and are making more and more money off the backs of workers who are doing the jobs. They're doing the farming. So, yeah, it's completely blown out of proportion. But again, these people obviously have a loud voice because some of them are well connected. They just are. It's just the reality of the situation.
It's also completely blind to the idea of the difference principle, which is John Rawls' idea from a theory of justice, that inequalities within society should benefit the least advantaged the most and the most advantaged the least. So, like somebody who earns less than I don't know what the threshold is. Is it 10,000? Doesn't pay any tax on their income, and then it goes up from there. And it's the same thing with farmers who don't own 100 football pitches worth of farmland aren't going to be taxed at all. And there's sort of this misunderstanding there, like they either don't seem to understand or they're pretending not to understand.
Sorry to cut you off though. Sure. I want to stress this. This tax will not destroy farmers. They won't go anywhere. They're leveraging, by the way. And I completely understand that, by the way. If you're a very wealthy and you own a farm and you have huge amounts of land and you don't want to pay more in taxes, then it makes sense for you to kind of scaremonger a little bit and say, well, we're going to protest, which I'm sure they will, and say, look, you're threatening the existence of farmers. You're going to do that to try and make the government move on their position. But farmers are not going to be leaving. There's no threat here. There really isn't. And if there is, that just, to me, seems like you're not very patriotic if you don't want to pay your taxes. And again, it's not increasing taxation. It's ending a tax cut, which is inheritance tax, but it's not even the full one, as you pointed out in your monologue, it's 20%, not 40%. And again, there's different caveats where they get away with paying taxes. But I don't want to see a world where Jeremy Clarkson buys a farm or other rich people buy farms just to get out of paying taxes. I think it's disgraceful. So, yeah, my big criticisms of Labour, of course, but critical support for this one on this policy.
Yeah, critical support. I agree. That's where it should be. Also, a spirit just appeared to me in the corner of my room, with Femi's face, and reminded me that the EU and Common Agricultural Policy play a big role in this. Right, the fact that farmers are no longer getting rural development income support and weather support is like a big because previously under the Common Agricultural Policy, they would get some funds to help them with that. That's both the landowners and the farmers. But that stuff is like directed so that the landowners kind of cared less about that stuff because it was directed not towards protecting the profits, but actually protecting the farms. And if you want to talk about protecting the farms, I'm all for it. That sounds great. But it's not about protecting the farms. It's about protecting the money that they can make from the farms, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you actually. I've heard it suggested that this protest tomorrow is going to be in part people blocking roads, and there's an undeniable parallel between like the people who watch GB News, these farm protesters, people who are really anti Just Stop Oil and think they should all be attacked, and are all for like cracking down on protest rights. Is this the moment where the people who've been like really anti-protest for years go, oh, hang on, those anti-protest laws, that disturbance of the peace stuff, that getting, 2 years in prison, or was it 4 or 5 years in prison for planning a protest, that applies to us as well now. Shit, is it that moment?
I would like to say so, but I don't think it will. And the reason why is not because these people believe in protests as a right. For them, it's, well, this is legitimate protest, and other people are not legitimate. So for Just Stop Oil, they say, well, climate change is, I mean, it's still a fringe idea that man-made climate change isn't real. But if you're getting more and more people in the right-wing media peddle this myth, and you're getting Reform MPs talking about how, man-made climate change is overblown, then you're going to create this narrative that those that are disrupting traffic, those that are throwing soup on paintings, are doing this because these are mad, crazy people got nothing else to do, rather than a legitimate thing to protest about. So unfortunately, the cognitive dissonance here is going to be a factor in this. And no, a lot of these people who are supporting the farmers to protest, which, by the way, I completely support their right to protest. I disagree why they're protesting, but I'm glad they are, because I'm consistent. I think you should protest for whatever you believe in. If you support Brexit, I support those protests. If you want to go back in the EU, I support your right to protest. But unfortunately, for these people who are supporting the farmers, largely, they think, well, this is a legitimate issue. These other people, they're just cranks, they're crazy. So you would like to think that there'll be sort of a light bulb moment where we think, actually, all those people I attacked who protested in terms of climate change and Just Stop Oil, wow, maybe it's good that they have their rights, so I have my right. I'm sure they won't change their opinion. I'm sure they still support Just Stop Oil activists going to jail for 5-6 years, whilst, farmers can disrupt the roads, because it's not about democracy or free speech for them. It's more free speech for me, not for thee.
Yeah, it's it's the classic thing in right-wing societies, isn't it? It's like the law should apply, but it applies to other people.
Yeah.
That's how it's applied. It's applied to other people. There's also stories going about that Tommy Robinson supporters are backing these protests. Now, that could be just because it's like an anti-Labour thing. But do you think there's kind of other reasons? Do you think like this kind of playing the working class thing suits, like, kind of matches their narrative, or what's your thoughts on why that is?
Well, we couldn't fully know their reasons to go. What I would say is, why is it that you don't see Tommy Robinson or supporters at anti-austerity marches? And the reason being is, if you sort of zoom out on this, just look that this is just a class thing, right? if you're marching with these farmers, right, you are marching for the rights of the very wealthiest in society. You are marching to say to the government, please let them keep their tax breaks, right? Now, Tommy Robinson is not a working class hero, despite him trying to portray himself as such. A lot of his supporters pretend they're very working class. A lot of them are middle class. A lot of them are actually quite wealthy themselves. So you're going to see these people support policies that support the wealth, the rich or the wealthy, but you won't see them at other protests. And I think that needs to be people need to understand that, because if Tommy Robinson, was concerned about immigration because actually he cares about the working class, he cares about the fact that public services are strained and people can't get on the housing ladder, then why isn't he on these other marches where leftists are, where they're calling for the material conditions to be improved across the entire population? It's because he doesn't care about these people. It's because he doesn't care about the working class. And a lot of his supporters who aren't working class themselves don't care about that either. But you see him at a rally supporting rich people. So you have to look at this as a class element. That's all it is.
Yeah. And for so many of his supporters and for him, I think politics is vibes. It's football teams. It's vibes. It's another form of like football hooliganism for like certain people. And just
Well,
like,
I mean, I don't know. I would say it's actually quite specific. I mean, vibes would kind of suggest that they don't really have a policy in mind, or they don't understand the material essentially they're class conscious. Like, I feel they're at these farmers' protests because they know exactly what they're calling for, rather than I'm going to go to the farmers' protest because there's this sort of image that the media have concocted that farmers are actually working class. The kind of the same way how Nigel Farage goes to the pub with his green jacket and his pint and his hat. I don't think that is drawing working class people in. I think that actually these aren't working class people, but they're pretending they're working class. That's it. And they're standing with their own class.
I think it's going to be a mix. I also think that the people who are at the top of our system, the people in the upper classes, it is vibes, because they don't, if they observe the material conditions in a very conscious way, I agree they're aligned with their class interests. I don't know that they are sort of consciously like thinking about their class interests. I think they're thinking about the vibes. We need to be strong. We need to stand up for hardworking Brits. Like, hardworking Brits for them is like, it's I don't know, it's British billionaires as much as it is
Right, sure, yeah.
cleaners, you know what I mean? Like, and they think, oh, that's the same thing, right? I feel like that's the thing about the vibes. Is it's like,
I did have an interesting conversation with someone a few years ago. He wasn't a right winger. I mean, he was a Labour supporter, but he was like a Blairite kind of guy, so he was hardly left wing. And we were discussing about those who start off working class or poor and they become very, very wealthy and uber rich. And this person I was talking to seemed to think that if you were to become rich, despite coming from a working class background, you're always working class. And I think that is kind of what a lot of people think what working class is. That it is a vibes-based thing. It's an aesthetic, but also it matters where you come from, but not where you are. So a lot of politicians play into that. Well, I grew up in this household. I grew up in poverty. And for me, I'm like, okay, maybe that means you might be slightly in touch. But if you then become a politician and then the policies harm where you came from, well, that's what matters to me the most. And just because you were born working class doesn't mean you'll always be working class. Your class is your relationship to the means of production. And I think a lot of people think that if you're born working class, that's with you forever. Sorry, but it's not. And I can probably kind of buy into your sort of vibes argument there. Especially when, as you just said, these sorts of people think that even if you're a billionaire, but you work really hard, well, this is a worker, And it sort of brings up the discussion, was a couple of weeks back when Keir Starmer was asked, what is a worker? And even though his answer was a lot better than his first time he answered it, it was still quite poorly framed. But he was saying, essentially, those that work and get a draw wage, and that's their main income, that's a worker. Those that make an income from mostly not work, that's not a worker. He's actually correct, by the way. But then you've got people like Adam Brooks from Jeeb News. He filmed himself in his pub, and he's like fixing his pub up. There's a flood in his pub. He's like, and Keir Starmer thinks I'm not a worker. I was like, well, obviously you're working there, but you're drawing an income from your pub. You're not working for your wage. You have capital, and that capital is giving you capital back. That's what we mean by it. But I feel like we need to, us on the left probably need to, improve our communication on what class is. Get people Marxist. Let's make everyone a Marxist.
Big time. I think it's interesting when somebody performs the role of both the capital owner and the manager, because that's where people tend to get confused. Like, you can be both at the same time, but ultimately it's the capital ownership that's going to take priority for you, because you own the business.
Well, that's where you get landlords, the smaller time landlords.
Yeah,
you don't hire managers or retail managers, property managers. Sorry, excuse me. But they'll kind of do their own landlording as well. So they'll own it, and then they'll come in and fix your boiler. And they'll say, "Well, I'm a poor landlord, or I'm a worker." And it's like, well, your main source of income is from landlording, and also you fixing someone's boiler. Well, they're paying for that as well anyway. I think that sort of gets all mixed into it as well. But if you're a landlord, even if you have one property, you're not working class, you're not a worker. I'm sorry.
Have you seen Plebs, the BBC
show?
Yeah.
I've watched a couple of episodes.
Okay. I was about to make a hyper specific reference and go, it's not.
Yeah, no, I probably didn't draw any political conclusions from it. It was sort of, I just put it on. It's quite a funny show.
I'll rewatch it.
So much political stuff from entertainment, but
there's an election episode that is just like watch it. Is absolutely amazing. In terms of like representing the working class and then understanding the working class and what they actually want, is like, it's really good for like material conditions. Like, we'll have to go into that at some point. Maybe we can do a review of it.
Yeah, maybe we will. That would be fun.
Yeah. But we should move on to our next story for now, which is again tied into the first. So, is our producer still here? Thank you. And by the way, you can support us. You can support us at Turn Left Media so that we can have somebody to poke our producer awake when it's time to move on to the next story. Sorry, I shouldn't be mean to my producer. Keeping us afloat here. Okay, we should move on to our next story, which is tied into the first. So, Adrian Ramsey, the co-leader of the Greens, has come out against the government lifting the inheritance tax exemption for farmers. Politics Home quoted his interview with House magazine. Green Party co-leader Adrian Ramsey said the government was right to identify that the loophole that enables very wealthy people to put money into farmland as a way of avoiding taxes being exploited, and that the loophole needs to be addressed. It's not good for real farmers if land is being bought up by people who are not interested in farming and are just using it to avoid paying tax. But he added the government needs to have another look at what it's got planned, and be able to make a clear distinction between people who are speculating in buying land and actual family firms. Sorry, this is really serious, but I'm still laughing about the thing before. How many actual family farms have land, not property, worth over £1 million or 100 football pitches worth of land is very questionable, to say the least. I really think that Adrian Ramsey with that one is barking up the wrong tree. We're really not talking about the most poverty-stricken people in farming here, right? That's the people who are doing the work, as we were just saying. I have more sympathy with Ramsey's second point, though, as he went on to say that farmers in Waveney Valley are telling him that they want to be able to more easily access funding for nature-friendly farming. However, the government said it would maintain, not increase, the $2.4 billion annual budget for farm payments, which reimburse farmers for making nature-friendly changes to their farms. While the Green co-leader said this effective reduction of funding for nature-friendly farming did not get that much attention following the budget, the big national environmental charities have highlighted that there needs to be a significant increase in more than doubling of the nature-friendly farming budget. He said he is really keen to push that. On this second point, I feel like he's got more of a case, as that is effectively a cut to rewilding budgets, which are a measure that we could really use more of in this country. We could really use more general rewilding. What do you think of his criticisms here, Curtis?
I'll start with the second point. of course, I do agree. It kind of follows on from what we were discussing before, that a lot of these subsidies go to the landowners, and we need to make sure it's targeted to go to go to those who are doing the work and maintain the infrastructure there. So yeah, I obviously agree with that. It looks like that is a cut to the subsidy. However, I think that was a terrible answer in the first part. Look, I vote for the Green Party at the general election. I implored everyone to do so. I still will. But I'm very disappointed with Adrian Ramsey. This isn't his first rodeo. You'll remember that he came out against Labour's plans to build pylons because it went through his constituency. And he said, well, we need to redraw up plans. We need to look at, how can we do this a bit more. He said it was, damaging the environment, which I'm not sure if I believe. Really, he understands that this is his seat is a very Tory-held seat, and he won it, and he wants to keep his Conservative voters happy. And I'm sorry to say, but that is the case. As we've just pointed out at the beginning of the show, that these cutting inheritance tax does not hit poor farmers, and I think he knows this, because if we were to talk about income tax or any other form of taxation that wasn't to do with rural areas, I don't think Adrian Ramsey would be like, oh, maybe we should look into this a bit more and almost do a bit of a means testing on the taxes. They'd be like, no, we should increase our taxation. But suddenly it's going to hit those in his own constituency and those who voted for him. He has essentially thrown his principles out the window. And he's acting like a Green Tory, I'm sorry to say. I think he has been a discredit to the Green Party, so much so that I think he shouldn't be the deputy leader. I mean, the Labour Party has kicked out class politics, right? The last time we saw any semblance of class politics was with Jeremy Corbyn. A lot of people were excited, and I was too. Finally, class politics was back on the agenda. That's now in its little box. And the Green Party has taken up that mantle. I've been extremely impressed by Zach Polansky. I called Adrian Ramsey deputy. He's the co-leader. Zach Polansky's the deputy. I've been extremely impressed with Zach Polansky because he's talked about the things that we really care about in a very coherent way. The message is, look, we care about workers, we care about class. The Labour Party doesn't. Now, what does it say to the Green Party's message that you've got the co-leader saying, actually, I'm siding with wealthy farmers? I think is deplorable and disgraceful. And I think he should be questioning whether he's in the right party. Now, that doesn't mean I think he is exactly like a Tory where he hates the poor or anything like that. I think, he would be a much better politician than many other politicians. I absolutely believe that. And he would be very good on public ownership. I think he would be very good on, he would be very good on the environment. I absolutely believe that. However, just as I was saying at the beginning of the show, I think unearned income is more important than income tax. There is so much unearned wealth out there. And we could do so many things if we were to tax wealth. The Green Party has been calling for a wealth tax over and over again. Good, fantastic policy. But you have the co-leader essentially saying, actually, we don't want to tax this wealth, though. It sends a really poor message. I think he's just simply, okay, he has to represent his constituencies, fine, but you also have to have your own principles. That's why we have political parties. And I think he's actually putting the essentially rich farmers in his own constituency over the party and over the country. I like that he said there should be increases of subsidies, because that's not really a toxic thing to say to farmers as well, because no farmer on the march, or no rich farm owner is going to oppose subsidies, even if it was mostly to go to the farmers themselves. That's not going to hurt them. But what really gets down to it, the brass tack, shall I say, literally is the tax. And Adrian Ramsey doesn't want to stand up and say, no, we should be ending the tax break. So, yeah, really, really disappointed with Adrian Ramsey here. And it's not the first time. It's really not the first time. And I think, I don't know, I think there should be some questions about whether he's in the right position or not. Because I want the Green Party to succeed so much. I think they are the only viable alternative to the duopoly, it's not really a duopoly. I suppose you've got the Lib Dems and Reform, but the Greens are the only viable opposition, I think, when it comes to the left. I don't want it being spoiled by someone like Adrian Ramsey. He won't even essentially support wealth taxes. I mean, I know he said it, but when it comes down to an actual policy, his first instance, he's not calling an increase in wealth taxes. It's not a good look.
Yeah, I've got some sympathy with him because I know Waveney Valley, where he is, it is farmer central. If he doesn't play to his base a little bit, he's got to be, However, it does, unfortunately, with this and the pylon story, it does seem like he's unfortunately, coming out and supporting things which are actually hindering the good things that the Labour Party are doing. And you don't want him to be like criticising Labour just for the sake of criticising Labour. I want him to be criticising the way that I have seen him do, but it's kind of not the stuff that has made the headlines. I want to see him criticising Labour on the stuff that's like, like the rewilding stuff. That's good. I want that to be the headline. I want that to be all he says about it. He doesn't have to support the protest. He goes, well, he could have turned it around and gone, well, I can understand where those farmers are coming from. If they want to go and protest, that's their right. I just wish they would give that same right to the Just Stop Oil protesters because the climate crisis is an emergency. But also, I think there's more pressing matters. For example, the fact that we've underfunded rewilding, our connections to the European agricultural policy have been lost. Like so many things that we could be doing that will actually help farmers, not the people who own farmland, two distinct groups. But he could have played into all that.
But I mean, I also wonder though, like, is it an attack because of the inheritance tax? Like, he's brought up the point about subsidies, but has he looked for a reason to not support the bill to make him sound that he's not right wing or he's simply against this because of the increased inheritance tax? Right? Has he just like, does he actually care about the subsidy? I'm sure maybe he does. But I feel like that was a reason, kind of an excuse to say, I don't think I can support this bill because Labour haven't done enough on this.
Yeah.
It feels like he's playing politics here. Now, in terms of the pylons, I mean, there was no excuse for that because the Green Party, that they are called the Green Party, and the biggest existential threat to humanity is climate change. And essentially, he was against these pylons. Let's be honest, if we're going to read between the lines, because his constituency probably thought they were ugly and they wouldn't be happy with him if they were to build these massive pylons in the area. But I'm sorry, but there comes a point where you have to stand with your principles. I understand compromise is key. I understand that you want to win votes. But if it's two key areas, I think these are two key areas which the Green Party are strong on, wealth tax and the environment, and you're equivocating on that, then that to me says, should you really be an MP representing the Green Party? I don't know.
It is a good question. More generally on the question of farming, I made a note of the fact that the Food Security Index says that we import around 40% of all our food, and I spotted somebody earlier in the comments said we grow the other 60% in McDonald's, which I thought was quite a good line. But it does just make sense, right? In a service economy, most of us aren't working in farm fields. It makes sense that we import most of our food. It's how most of the world does it right now, unless you're a big food producing nation like Ukraine, where you've got like the system, the breadbasket of Europe. You've got the system set up. That is your big export, right? I think it just kind of makes sense. So the idea that we're dependent upon homegrown stuff also doesn't quite work, but I do think that we should work to keep farming alive. It's just worth always pointing that out, right? That we're still importing almost half of our food, for 40 to 47%. I did want to say as well, leasees might be negatively affected, which is an interesting sort of like counter argument. So you say, well, it's not the farm owners that will be affected, but potentially the people who are leasing the land off them. So it could still massively affect farmers, and therefore there might be farmers who are themselves actual farmers protesting out in the streets going, this is unfair, this is going to hit us, even though it's sort of hitting their landlord, effectively, their business landlord. But I don't know about you, but I feel like this is always an argument you can make against taxing rich people, right? That the costs will be knocked down the ladder onto poor people, like introducing the minimum wage. I feel like there's always this line that they can take. Like, if you put a tax on rents, there's always going to be some landlords who are going, well, and there's always going to be an argument that, well, you're just putting costs up for renters. And I guess how
Yeah.
would we address that?
Okay. I mean, I suppose you got two separate things here. One, how do you address it? And two, this is kind of a line that's deployed on absolutely everything. Yeah, you tax the wealthy, the cost goes down to the consumer, and of course the billionaire class do that. Obviously, I know this isn't really the discussion today, but obviously Trump's tariffs. Obviously, you do import tariffs, and that cost is going to go down to the consumer. But taxation is still a little bit different. I mean, if that is the case, then that should be written into the bill. But it's not an argument to not do that, because taxation is extremely useful. If it was completely the case that anytime you tax something, all of that cost goes on to the consumer, we wouldn't have taxes. So taxation is effective. There are instances when that cost is passed on. Like I said, whether it's import taxes, whether it's a sugar tax, I think that is true. But removing a tax cut on inheritance tax, I mean, maybe there would be a little bit of cost being moved on to farmers and consumers, maybe, but on a wider scale, I'm not too sure. I'd have to see more of the data on that, or we'd have to see the fallout from this. But I've never really been moved by that argument, because we do get it all the time. You tax billionaires, and either they'll put that tax onto you, or they'll leave the country. And it's kind of like, well, maybe you're making this argument just so you make sure you don't get taxed. You're putting the fear into governments when they do that. Often, it's a myth. Capital flight is largely a myth. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But if you tell me that all these businesses, all these corporations move because slightly higher levels of taxation, it doesn't happen. It's always been a myth. So I would be skeptical of that. And I don't think it's an excuse not to tax people where they should be taxed.
Yeah, the economist Richard Murphy pointed out in one of his books that the OECD did a study that went on over 50 years looking at where companies invest in OECD countries. And invariably, in countries in the global north, investment can be indexed against those countries which have the highest levels of macroeconomic stability, right? So it's a stable economy for them to invest in, and also have infrastructural investment. So the workforce can move about easily, and the consumer can move about easily. And it just makes sense that that's where investment gets spent, because that's where you get the best return, right? Tax actually has very little to do with, even though they make a big song and dance about it, if you invest well and you have macroeconomic stability, you're in a good place.
Well, this is the irony, actually, where even the policies that help the billionaire class, which increases inequality, obviously it's bad for us, it's bad for the nation or globally, but it's also bad for the capitalist class, because in the end you need to have a stable economy, you need to have people with money in their pockets and a well-functioning country in order to make your profits. And you've hit the nail on the head there. Taxation plays a small part. Of course, they are going to kick up a fuss about it because they want to pay less taxes, of course. But if you were to ask a country, would they rather invest their businesses in first world nations, we say, where there's adequate transport, could be improved, but there's adequate transport, there's a minimum wage, or they work in poorer nations? All right, they make their money off slave labor and stuff, but that is not a viable long-term business plan. You'll remember John McDonnell. John McDonnell went to the city of London, and he spoke to them. And of course, John McDonnell, Jeremy Corbyn are hardly friends of the capitalist class. But they spoke to them and said, we are going to raise your taxes, by the way, but this is what's going to happen in return. You're going to see so much investment. You're going to see better public services, which everyone enjoys. You're going to see a much more vibrant economy where you're going to see higher levels of economic activity. People are going to be able to spend more money. And you're going to have a stable economy because even though we're taxing you more, you know exactly what we're going to do with that money. We're going to invest. And guess what? A lot of people in those circles welcomed those moves. In fact, in 2019, there was an open letter written in the Financial Times by multiple economists saying you need to back Labour in 2019. So, and that's where, if you contrast that with Liz Truss's unfunded tax cuts, a tax cut does benefit the capitalist class. They like their tax cuts, but it was unfunded and it crashed the economy. So in reality, businesses like stability, and businesses would much prefer, whether they realize it or not, a more equal society, a better funded society, and more investment, which does kind of destroy the myth that, oh, you tax us, we're going to go. Yeah.
Yeah, who wants to live like, no disrespect, like Panama particularly has been a victim of colonialism, so that's a factor there. But like, if it was as simple as just cutting your taxes, like you just cut taxes and investment flows in, and this everybody's standard of living rises, then the best places to live in the world would be Panama and the Cayman Islands. But they're not, right? No one wants to live there. No one wants to live somewhere that is effectively just a tax haven, because tax havens don't create the investment that people say that they do, that these rich people say that they do. It's just a myth. We should go on to our next story because we could talk about this all day, and you and I would talk about this all day.
Yes, we will.
So let's go on to our next story. Rachel Reeves might well have been lying about her experience in the field of economics, according to some critics. The Guardian made a note of the story after Downing Street struck back at the accusations. Downing Street has defended the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, as someone who's been straight with the public in response to claims she embellished her CV. Last month, the Guido Fawkes website said that Reeves was wrong to claim that she had worked as an economist at Halifax Bank of Scotland, HBOS, before she became an MP. Reeves' first job after she left university was an economist at the Bank of England, but when she worked at HBOS, she had an administrative role, Guido Fawkes said. The story attracted little attention at the time, but in her Mansion House speech last week, Reeves referred to having worked as an economist at the Bank of England and then in financial services. And after that, Guido Fawkes discovered that Rachel Reeves had changed her LinkedIn profile. Instead of saying that she worked as an economist at the Bank of Scotland when she was at HBOS, it now says for that period that she was in retail banking at Halifax. The Sunday Telegraph then conducted their own investigation and found that Reeves claimed to have been an economist at the Bank of England for a decade, despite the fact that she only worked there for 6 years, and one of those years was during her master's degree programme. Of course, it is directly relevant if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer and people think you have experience as an economist that you actually don't have. But what do you think on this one, Curtis? I know you'll never miss a chance to dunk on Rachel Reeves, and don't worry, I'm right behind you. But I do think this one may have been like a bit overblown.
Yeah, it has slightly been overblown, and disappointingly, yeah, I do like to dunk on Rachel Reeves. It's one of my favourite pastimes, attacking the Labour Party. And don't worry, everyone's going to get their turn. But it's been slightly overblown because, you know, the first echoes of this narrative was Rachel Reeves has lied about her economic past. And the thoughts that spring into your mind is, oh my God, did she just work at Greggs and had no experience in the economy? Whereas you look into the detail, all right, she didn't work for the Bank of England for 10 years, it was 6. Okay, so she still had years of experience there. Okay, she did work at this other place. Was it Lloyds Bank or the other bank you mentioned? Sorry.
I was gone from my head now. Halifax. Sorry.
Halifax, right.
Halifax Bank of Scotland, HBOS.
And, okay, it was a slightly lower level position. You kind of spiced up the story a little bit. Of course, the media, or some parts of the media, of course, political parties are going to use that to attack politicians. I mean, that's just part of the game. Having said that, she is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, right? She has our money. She's in control of our money. And it is important that her story is completely straight. So it does concern me that she lied or whatever, kind of misrepresented herself in a CV and then had to go back and change it. What this tells me is, once again, the so-called grown-ups and sensibles in the Labour Party are not the grown-ups or the sensibles. These are the types of things you see the Conservatives do, and then you get all the Liberal pundits going, oh my God, Labour would never do this. This is just more corrupt Conservatives. The fact of the matter is, despite Labour campaigning on being anti-corruption, they have been maybe not quite as much, but certainly been very corrupt themselves. And I'm not talking about taking clothes from Wahid Ali, although I think that's pretty bad. I'm talking about taking millions of pounds from hedge fund companies based in the Cayman Islands that have investment in oil companies and arms manufacturers. And then taking on billionaire donors who supported the Conservative Party before and now saying, actually, we're not going to tax billionaires. We're not going to have the wealth tax. That sort of corruption exists in both parties, and the Labour Party has not been acting like the grown-ups. Despite attacking the Conservatives on it, they have been pretty awful. And that, to me, sort of beds into that. Again, it's not the biggest scandal in the world, but we were told at least if Labour aren't different than the Tories in terms of their ideology, at least competence they would be, and they failed on that. But I want to go after those who are also attacking Rachel Reeves, namely Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage said, see? There we go. This just proves that Rachel Reeves knows nothing about the economy. Well, first I want to say, who's Nigel Farage to talk? How does he know anything about the economy? He stood on a manifesto that wanted to slash budgets, essentially to the chunk of, to the size of Milei from Argentina. And we can see how Argentina has done. I mean, poverty is up hundreds of percent. Inflation is up 300%. Because they've essentially destroyed the framework of the government. It's a libertarian nightmare. And you look in the Reform Manifesto, they wanted to slash government budgets. They wanted to increase the tax threshold to £20,000. A good policy if you're on that wage, but how are they going to fund it? They didn't care. You even had Reform MPs talking about net zero on immigration. Now, I get it. A lot of people want to see immigration numbers come down, but let's actually have a sensible conversation on this. But net zero on immigration, my God, you will destroy this country. You will destroy this economically. So listening to these figures and attacking Rachel Reeves on the economy is insane. Now, you absolutely can attack Rachel Reeves on the economy. I've done it many times, but my criticisms of her on the economy is far different to what these right-wing figures are saying. My criticisms are she's peddling economic myths. Economic myths that the country is it's like a household budget. You have to increase taxation or you have to make cuts in order to fund public services. It's a load of nonsense. In fact, actually, almost surprisingly, the budget didn't lean into that rhetoric as much as I expected it to. The budget was not a great budget, but it wasn't a terrible budget, although it's the best we're ever going to get from Rachel Reeves, by the way. I mean, she said that herself. So, I think the story is slightly overblown, but I'm going after everyone. There's no good guys in this. They're all bad. I think they deserve to get attacked on this. But is it concerning? A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, it's who it's coming from. I think is particularly jarring. Like, I hate seeing Guido Fawkes being like a respected publication as though it doesn't just regularly post like right wing bile, like just sheer bile, in my opinion. Got to be careful. But yeah, I think that Guido Fawkes is not a respectable publication. That's my opinion on it. And also with Nigel Farage, he tweeted in the when Liz Truss announced her budget, right? He said it was the best budget since 1976. The best budget, I think he said the best conservative budget, or something like the most conservative budget and the best budget since 1976. And then he quietly deleted that tweet. Wonder why. Yeah, so maybe we shouldn't take any lessons on economics.
Yeah, don't get any
economics from that guy,
Never get economic advice from conservatives or right-wingers. Trust me, they don't have a clue about the economy. They don't. I know you might not want to take my word for it, but I'll happily debate any right-winger out there who thinks they can debate on the economy. I'm open. My door's open.
We should facilitate that on turn left as well.
No.
Yes, but let's go on to our third and final story. Sorry, but before we go on to our, excuse me, fourth and final story, we are going to react to some of your comments. Firstly, though, I want to remind you that we are still all volunteers at Turn Left and are doing our best to produce content around our paid work. If we want to become a fully fledged media organisation, we need your help. Please like and share our content and help us out financially by going to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support, where you can make a one-off donation or give us a small donation each month to keep us going. We are now also on Blue Sky, the fastest growing social media alternative to Twitter. It might not be the fastest, it's our growing social media alternative to Twitter. So do go check out our work on there. We've just joined. Yeah, come say hi to us. Come not tweet blue at us. Come blue sky at us. I don't know. I don't know what the verb is yet. So let's have a look at some of these comments, shall we, Curtis?
Someone needs to prod the producer again.
We're being really mean to our producer tonight. I'm so sorry. Cool. Sounds a bit like a feudal system. Yeah, the land ownership thing, right? I think this was in reference to the farming thing with the leasing out the land. Yeah, yeah, 100%. I agree.
Same with landlordism. It's all the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. Sorry, I'll be very quick. I don't want to get too theory pilled, but Adam Smith, one of the proponents of capitalism, actually hated landlords because he saw landlordism as a feudal system. So in his books, he was very much against it, and he doesn't see it as a proponent of capitalism. I would disagree there. I think landlordism and capitalism work very well together, but he wasn't a big fan. Hated them.
Yeah, so Scottish Soul says, I still can't wrap my brain around it all. These farmers, the actual hard workers, is this tax actually going to affect them? Nope. I was under the impression it was only the millionaire farmers affected. Yes, and there's like that knock-on effect to be taken into account. But like, again, you can always sort of make that argument whenever you tax a rich person that it might affect a poor person somewhere down the line. You know, like if you put an income tax on somebody who's rich, they could go, well, you're going to make me fire my cleaner. How very dare you? It's like, no, that's down to you. Like this tax shouldn't affect that. But yes, I needed more info on this before making an informed decision. You just provided it. Thank you. Cheers, son. Nice of you to say to us. Probably more aimed at Curtis than me, to be honest. The UK only supplies about 30% of the food it requires, so UK farmers might not be as critical as EU farmers. I thought it was roughly a sort of 50-50 split. I could be wrong on that.
Well, it might be smaller. And again, it sort of alludes to the point you were making that. And by the way, like I mean, I wouldn't deploy this argument if I were to go on like the mainstream media, because even if they provided 10%, I'm very happy to support our farmers and subsidise them. I'm not against public subsidies, but I suppose it is important to note when you frame it this way, when you do have people going on ITV and saying, hey, look, they're talking about there's only 500 farmers. Well, if there were 5 less farmers, we'd all be in trouble. I mean, you know, you can want to keep your tax cut without bending the truth here, but, you know.
Yeah, also subsidise the farmers. Don't subsidise don't subsidise the shareholders, right? I guess that's the distinction. Janice J says they'll just put their prices up, won't they? As usual, we will end up paying for this. Yeah, I think there's an argument for that. But ultimately, that's an argument against sort of any taxation ever.
I would say that, even if prices do go up, they don't usually go up at the rate of their taxation, right? So, I mean, a good example is, you know, in the US, I mean, Bernie Sanders deployed this argument. It's very good. It was like, they were asked this question, or he was asked this question. Well, if you tax the wealthy, they're going to make things more expensive. Or you're going to pay people $15 as a minimum wage. Well, fast food restaurants are going to put up their prices. And he was like, they will. A couple of dollars maybe on your burger, but in return, you're going to get workers on a decent wage. Things may slightly increase, but it's not going to be like, oh my God, I've been taxed this amount, therefore I'm going to put the entire cost on the consumer. More often than not, it's only a small increase. But again, you can't really blame the government for that. It's their decision to do that at the end of the day. But you can't use that as an argument against taxation. We need to be taxing people.
wage suppression and inflationary pressures, and the balance between those two is probably more of a concern than
And I think
taxes being
most people would
applied.
agree with that as well. Inflation is far more of a concern to everyone. I mean, think about it as a massive role, a major role in the US elections.
Yeah. Yes, and it's the balance between those things and wage suppression. Like that's the as Edward Sexby says correctly. Nobody should be in jail for planning protest, even people we don't like.
Absolutely.
Agreed, 100%. Definitely agree. Yep. Jay says I see the Green Party as liberalism and their political rhetoric, like Bernie left sheepdog Sanders. Quite harsh on Bernie there. They use rhetoric stolen from the real non-electoral political left movements and organisations. I don't know. I think there's a mix of. I don't think it's quite that black and white. I
No,
think there's a mix of good stuff in both Bernie and the Green Party, and also some liberalism,
I
some
mean, look,
Israel stuff.
unfortunately, liberalism infects all corners of political life. Maybe not fascists, right? It's hard to get rid of, so we kind of have to deal with that. But the Green Party is our UK Green Party is one of the best, Green parties in the world. Of course, there are going to be people within it that we disagree with, but I don't think you should put a blank check on that. Bernie Sanders, I mean, I have criticisms of him, especially on Israel-Palestine. He's still one of, if not the best politician in the US. I still believe that anyway.
Yeah, I think that's that's I just think I'd still say that right now. The Greens have OEN, directly democratic structure. A directly democratic structure. I think that's it. The left can do stuff there. It won't get it done if only the right slash MC libs are running it. I don't know what MC stands for, but I'm blanking on that one. MC?
MC.
No.
Is it one of those centre?
Main culture? I don't know.
Middle centre.
Middle centre libs are running it, of course.
Well, I mean, that is true that the Green Party are a properly democratic party. So I think, in that respect, like you should stick with the Green Party because even if, I mean, for me, I'm not sure if I am happy with Adrian Ramsey right now. It's good to be. I mean, I'm not a member of the party. I don't really want to join a party at this stage, but I certainly will support a party where I think, first of all, can push the left, the discourse left. They still have really good policies, but most importantly, they're a democratic party. And if you want to democratise Britain, you have to democratise. We used to say the Labour Party, but that's not going to happen. So we have to democratise a party, and they're the only one. So I think we all have to get behind the Greens, if I'm honest.
Yeah. Cal is going to get you. He's going to get you to join.
Cal's going to be very upset with me that I've attacked the Greens tonight, but you know.
Has the Turn Left team covered Biden giving the green light for British and French missiles to be launched from Ukraine, US targeting and guiding intelligence and hardware? Well, what a coincidence. Okay, so time for our final story of the evening. So what a coincidence. Time for our final story of the evening. After North Korean troops were authorized by Russia to fight in the Ukrainian-occupied region of Kursk, the USA has granted Ukraine special privileges to use long-range missiles on targets deeper inside of Russia for all the purposes specifically of defending the captured territory. According to the BBC, the move marks a major change in policy for Washington, which has refused for months to agree to Kiev's request for authorization to use the ATACMS missiles outside its own borders. On Sunday, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky reacted to the news, which came via briefings from US officials, saying such things are not announced. Missiles speak for themselves. Russian President Vladimir Putin had previously warned Western nations against such a move, saying it would represent the NATO military alliance's direct participation in the Ukraine war. Army Tactical Missile Systems, ATACMS, can reach up to 300 kilometers, 186 miles. Unnamed US officials have told the New York Times and the Washington Post that Biden's approval of Ukraine's use of ATACMS came in response to Russia's decision to allow North Korean soldiers to fight in Ukraine. The line that I found most insightful from that same BBC article, though, was this one. In effect, the Biden administration is telling Ukraine that it will support its efforts to hold on to the small chunk of Russian territory it currently occupies as a powerful bargaining chip for any possible negotiations in the future. Biden is likely trying to shore up Ukraine's position as Donald Trump enters office, as Trump has been very skeptical about the war in Ukraine. The BBC report that there is still division in the Trump camp about how to proceed with Russia, right? Donald Trump Jr., Trump's son, wrote on social media, military industrial complex seems to want to make sure they get World War III going before my father has a chance to create peace and save lives. Many of Trump's top officials, such as Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, say the US should not provide any more military aid to Ukraine, but others in the next Trump administration hold a different view. National Security Advisor Michael Waltz has argued that the US could accelerate weapons deliveries to Ukraine to force Russia to negotiate. Which way the president-elect will go is unclear, but many in Ukraine fear that he will cut off weapons deliveries, including ATACMs. CMS, excuse me. At the moment, I guess it's a judgment call. Curtis, do you think Trump is likely to escalate, trying to get a concession from Putin, or de-escalate to keep his Kremlin-friendly, let's say, crowd happy?
Okay, so in order to work out where Trump's going to sit on this, I mean, it is hard to. I wouldn't say it's hard to say. I want to look at, if you look at 2016, right, and we've talked about Trump's picks last week, right. He has kind of stuck his middle finger up to his MAGA base because, just like 2016, he's employed a cabinet full of neocons and warhawks. Now, of course, there has been this bastardization of the Trump campaign, namely by J.D. Vance when he went on Joe Rogan's podcast, that, oh, Trump is this anti-war guy, this is going to be an anti-war administration. Is bullshit. Could not be further from the truth. A lot of MAGA supporters, a lot of Trump supporters think that Trump is going to end the wars. You heard it in that rhetoric then. Oh, Biden's trying to create World War III. We're going to come in and fix it. Again, it's a load of shit. Trump is extremely hawkish. His first administration was very, very neoconservative. I mean, I've said this many times, and I'm going to say it again. When it comes to the drone strikes, those of us on the left heavily criticized Obama for his drone strikes. He was a terribly hawkish president too. Well, Trump increased the levels of drone strikes in his first couple of years as president way more than the total of Obama. Trump also ripped up the Iran nuclear deal, which it was a deal between the US and Iran where they gave up their nuclear weapons. That was done under Obama. That was a good policy. Trump ripped that up. When it comes to Israel-Palestine, we all know his position on that. He's extremely, extremely pro-Israel. Like, he wants to glass Gaza. In fact, he decided to declare that the capital of Israel was going to be Jerusalem. I mean, that in itself increases tensions. This guy, regardless of his rhetoric, loves war, and his cabinet loves war. Now, there is obviously a couple of hardcore MAGA people who are absolutely Putin stooges, by the way. And not just people within the administration or the to-be administration. There's been a lot of right-wing media figureheads that have been exposed as taking Russian money, namely Tim Pool. And there's probably a lot out there. There's some people in that administration who will kind of want to sort of cozy up to Putin, but it's hard to say what the fallout from this is going to be. What we do know is that Trump isn't going to ensue for peace or anything like that. I know that there's a couple of people in his cabinet who absolutely desperately want to destroy or defeat Russia, not destroy, but defeat Russia. So I think Trump is stuck a middle finger up to his supporters. He's not going to ensue for peace. But where is he going to fall? That's unsure. I'm really not sure. I mean, he's spoken in favor of Putin before, as he has done with many other dictators. I know Putin is elected, but elected with 90% of the vote. So your guess is as good as mine. I think historically we need to use these indicators, and historically, if you look at 2016 to 2020, Trump has been incredibly hawkish.
Yeah, chapter 10 of, I had to look it up, chapter 10 of Agenda 47, which was Trump's platform that he ran on, was literally called Return to Peace Through Strength, right? So even when he's talking about peace, He's talking about like
That's
using the
a very
military.
classic fascist talking point as well.
Yeah, it is big time. Big time. It's like we will return to peace through strength by just overwhelming our opponents.
Yeah.
Like peace for them is winning the war, right? That's what it is. Is like being on top. Peace isn't like coming to an agreement with your partner nations.
Mm.
Should all work towards human rights. Peace for them is we are the biggest and the strongest, so nobody dare challenge us. Challenge us. And if they do challenge us, I don't know. I don't know where that sound came from. Challenge us, and I feel like that is a commitment which sets up situations that escalate. Right? It was the whole theory behind the Great Power Struggle before World War One. The idea that you have Russia and Austro-Hungary and sorry, Germany and Austro-Hungary and Britain and France, and they're two such ginormous global powers that they would never go to war because it would be ridiculous for them to go to war. And lo and behold, they did go to war. Um, Slightly flipping the script though, um, what about what Biden's thinking right now? Because do we take Putin's threat that he's considering this as NATO involvement seriously? And if so, is Biden taking them less seriously because he knows that Putin's probably just thinking, well, I just have to wait for us to get our man on the inside, wait for the Trump presidency,
Mm.
and then I can sweet talk Trump, or I can use my leverage over Trump, and try and get some leverage, and try and sort things out so it's a much better situation for me. It doesn't really matter what Biden does right now, and Biden's kind of knowing this, knowing going into this. Oh yeah, I think there was a story. Someone in chat will correct me. I think there was a story of Russia leaking explicit photos of Melania Trump as well. And I think that was a sort of like it was. I think it was more or less as soon as Trump was elected, leaked explicit photos of Melania Trump. And I think that may well have been like we've got we know stuff.
Mm.
But I don't know what you think about that. But let's focus on what's Biden thinking here.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak about those pictures. I've not heard about the story, but very interesting if it's got some legs. No pun intended. But it'd be very interesting to read about that. I mean, is this a political calculation from Biden? Is he doing this from a personal sort of legacy thing? I don't know. If he is, there's no point because his legacy is absolutely tarnished. But Putin is always going to say, well, this is going to be NATO increasing tensions. He's going to say that, which, to be fair, he is kind of right. I mean, the US is increasing the tensions with these long-range missiles. And yeah, it's gone against the long-held policy of Biden in the US, which is that, look, Ukraine needs to defend themselves. The West will supply aids, arms, but there was a ban on this type of weaponry. And look, I mean, this might annoy some of our viewers, but I'm okay with the idea of aid and weapons being sent over. I'm not comfortable. I mean, I don't like weapons being sent anywhere, especially when you think about the global arms race. But of course, at the end of the day, Russia is the aggressor here. They invaded Ukraine. Now, it is an escalation. And does the end justify the means? I'm going to guess. I guess it depends on whether this is actually going to help. I mean, Putin accusing the US of escalation, he is kind of right about that. But again, Putin was the one who invaded in the first place. My worry is how this would affect things at a larger scale. My worry is how many civilians would be injured or killed. And I think the lens in which Biden and the West views this is we've got to win regardless. Ukraine has got to defeat Russia. Now, look, it doesn't make you a Putin sympathizer or a puppet to acknowledge that Ukraine and Russia don't exist in isolation. You have to think about the wider region. You have to think about every action causes a reaction, and the more involved, the more dangerous the entire world becomes. And look, we don't want another world war. You have to allow Russia and Ukraine to fight. Help them without them becoming too involved. I mean, some argue from a non-interventionist perspective that even sending aid into Ukraine is wrong. Okay, I think that's a discussion to be had. But we're not in control of who wins the war. But we are in control of trying to contain warfare and not allowing it to spread across the world and escalate the conflict. So I'm unsure whether Biden is making a political calculation or if it's like a last hurrah because he knows that Trump may cozy up to Putin. But again, as I was just saying before, he has forces inside his cabinet who are, let's be honest, absolutely Russian's puppet. And you've got massive neocons who are very much, we will stand with the West. So I don't really know. Now, I do know there is one clear winner, and that is Lockheed Martin. At least they get to profit from the war because Lockheed Martin supplied the ATA CMS, it's quite hard to say actually, the weaponry. So at least the war profiteers will be okay.
I'm seeing people put in the chat saying, for example, not picking on anyone, but saying, for example, like, oh, Russia's right to be nervous because they've been invaded through Ukraine before. Well, frankly, I think for one thing, only the Mongols have successfully managed to conquer that part of the world, right? Like that's famously a very difficult area to conquer. So I don't think they've got too many worries on that front. I don't think it's in the interests of the West to have a big military conflict. But let's say you're right, still wouldn't justify invasion.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's the big leap, right? You can talk about Western influence in that region, and I think you're perhaps right to talk about Western influence in that region, unwanted Western influence all over the world. But I don't think there is a good argument for the for that. For the Russians therefore taking Ukraine. So the same persons put Siege of Leningrad, Napoleon, all of which were failures. I'm sorry, they were pushed out. It's a fact. I'm a World War II historian. Don't try me on this. They were pushed out, right? The Siege of Leningrad, the amount of Germans that died on the Eastern Front was absolutely phenomenal. Yes, these are examples, but they're examples of failures. This is the problem, right? I'm not saying that they can't be nervous about being invaded. I'm saying that taking into account the fact that they've only been successfully invaded by like the Mongols and maybe other groups that I'm not aware of, but taking that into account, it's really hard for me to go around and go and say, well, I sympathize with Russia to the extent that I believe that Ukraine should be annexed by Russia. That just doesn't work for me. It doesn't work. The invading your neighbor is just not. It's not on. Like there's no justification for it. Yeah, that's just me though. Maybe I'm wrong about that. And so somebody's Edwards put in the chat called 25 million dead Soviet citizens in World War II. It's in their collective memory. I agree. I totally agree. I'm not saying that the Siege of Leningrad was good for the Russians. Certainly wasn't. But what I'm saying is that you're pushing it by claiming that invaders don't need, that it's an easy path to invade Russia through Ukraine. I think that's pushing it. And certainly pushing it to the point where you're justifying an invasion. You don't have to, just because the West is bad, you don't have to pick and choose. You don't have to pick and choose and go, well, I don't support the West, so I have to support Russia, right? I think at that point you're just being a sheep of the other herd. I think you're like ignoring you're ignoring all of the downsides of backing Russia. You don't have to pick. You can go, there are things that are really bad about Russia, and there are really things that are really bad about the West. I don't think we have to pick. But I'm going into a bit of a rant, and we've overrun massively already. Did you want to add anything at the end? Did you want to add anything at the end?
I don't need to. I agree with what you're saying. So there's no notes on my end.
Awesome. In which case, let's end the show there. It's about all we have time for today. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. I really appreciate you, even those who disagree with me, and to Curtis for lending me his insights. We have a show on Wednesday at 7:30 p.m, so do please tune in for that. We're in a time of political instability across the world, so we appreciate your support. And again, please do give us a follow on Blue Sky. You can just search for Turn Left Media on there and comment at us. We really appreciate it, and we'll appreciate the engagement. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.